You're now listening to the Peach Pundit Podcast. Thank you for all of you who are rushing to patreon.com/peachpundit to support us. We appreciate, well, let's just not lie. None of you have done that yet. We really need you to, though, because we need to fund a couple of things. You know, I don't know if you've noticed, but our sound quality varies at best, and that's because we need a little more of a professional touch. Those things cost money, folks. You can help us by going to patreon.com/peachpundit. And it's really not helping us. It's helping you. And I know a lot of you listen because you come up to me and you say, Jason Pye's audio stunk last week. And when I hear feedback like that face to face from you, I know that you're listening, and I know that you can reach into that pocket and grab $5 and pass it along our way. It'll help a ton. But thank you for listening.
And apparently, Scott, you need a new camera too. So
yeah, I mean, this week most of the people who listen do not watch YouTube. They do listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So hopefully that won't be too much of a forbearance for folks. That the reality is, those of you who cannot see my face, you're the real winners here, right? That being said, we are joined today, Buzz Brockway, as always. Jason Pye could not be with us tonight, but we have a very special guest, Latham Saddler, who is running for the United States Senate in the Republican primary on May 24th, has decided to forge ahead and get to know us a little bit, and we're going to get to know him. So we're going to start this.
All wise advice from his political advisors and talk to us anyway. So.
Right. So with that said, we'll just start out by asking Mr. Saddler, what's your story?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. It's a privilege, and I'm a proud native son of Georgia. Was born in Atlanta. My mom's from a small town in South Georgia called Bainbridge. Went to UGA, and 9/11 happened while I was a student there, and obviously that changed all of our lives forever. And in my case, I didn't have any plans to join the military till that day, and did my research on the different special operations units and decided I wanted to serve as a Navy SEAL officer. Had no idea what the heck I was getting myself into, and I met a retired Navy SEAL captain who I shared my plan with, and he said, well, send me your resume and I'll let you know what your odds are. And so, guys, I send this gentleman my resume, and I won't use his language on your podcast, but he goes, you don't have a blank chance of getting selected, son. He said, I've had Olympic gold medalists, Rhodes Scholars, PhDs, D1 captains of their athletic teams compete for these spots, and there's maybe about 10 a year to go through what's called officer candidate school to become a naval officer and then ship out to BUD/S in Coronado, California, which is SEAL training. So I tell folks at 22, I was a very confident young man, and that was like having a humble pie just smashed straight in my face, but it was the best feedback I'd ever received. And it ended up leading me on a long journey where I spent the majority of my 20s working to make myself competitive to get there. So I actually went to Georgia Tech for a master's in international affairs, became fluent in Farsi and Dari, the languages they speak in Iran, Afghanistan, parts of Tajikistan. Actually got a fellowship to live in the region for a full academic year in Tajikistan. Before coming home, I backpacked through Afghanistan, did all sorts of crazy stuff, and then 6 years after that conversation with that SEAL, put in my application to the Navy, finally got selected, became a naval officer, shipped out to Coronado, California, turned 29 while I was in training, and I was the grandpa in my class. I mean, I was the oldest officer. And I tell folks all the time, guys, it was a miracle I made it through. I mean, at that age, I should not have made it. Being a Georgia boy, I was not a natural in the water, so all the underwater tests were just miserable. I broke my foot in what's called Hell Week. Ooh. I mean, just so many miracles led me through this process. But what's neat is the Navy just did an incredible job of using me as a newly minted SEAL who was fluent in those languages. So I immediately deployed to Afghanistan, and then I led a 25-man element in Iraq in 2015 after ISIS had just about taken over the country. In 2016, President Trump gets elected, and I received orders to come up to the White House to serve as director for intelligence programs on the National Security Council. And people are like, well, what does that mean? I was essentially managing the Black Ops portfolio. So there's a small set of missions that require the president's approval after the Secretary of Defense approves them. And I was that advisor at the White House. After Secretary Mattis approved these missions, they'd come to my desk and I'd vet them. And I'd actually just been out on these same types of missions just a few months before getting to the White House. So I was fresh off executing them. But yeah, it was my role to vet them and recommend to H.R. McMaster. I overlapped a little bit with John Bolton as well, whether or not President Trump should send the troops out to do the quiet work for the country. And I can tell you guys, every day we were up there, our adversaries felt American might and strength. There was no question about it. There's a lot of question about that right now, obviously, with our current administration, and that's got to change. But anyway, to make a long story short, I was at right around my 8-year mark on active duty, loving the job, loving my time in the teams, but transitioned out for pretty unique family reasons. I've got a blessing in my family and my twin brother, Ashby, who has Down syndrome, who's just a total stud. He loves being on camera. He's the extrovert. But he's an incredible human being and shaped me into the man that I am. And he lives with my parents. They're not getting any younger. And so my wife and I decided that whenever they can no longer care for him, he's going to come and live with us. When you're in the SEAL teams, you're having a blast, but you're gone 24/7. Yeah. So I knew I needed to prepare for that life transition. So walked away from the dream job after 8 years. And they kept me on board the White House now as a White House fellow, as a senior advisor working on domestic policy issues. And I was part of the team that got the First Step Act passed, the bipartisan criminal justice reform bill. I've got a number of funny stories from that experience, but one of them is, y'all, I mean, it was one of my first days as a White House fellow. I'm in the Roosevelt room, and it's a meeting on criminal justice reform, and the mix of people there was unbelievable. Yeah. I mean, on one end of the table, you had Jared Kushner. On the other end of the table, you had Van Jones of CNN. Yeah. On one side of the table, you had Leonard Leo of FedSoc. You had a Georgetown law professor who had done 10 years behind bars in his youth for robbing a bank. Wow. Is now a Georgetown law professor. And then there were a few other people there, but across from that guy, you had Kim Kardashian. I remember thinking, who am I? And it was the Roosevelt room of the White House. I mean, go figure.
That should be a painting you could go to the mall and buy of all those folks in one room sitting around a table talking about important policy. You mentioned just a moment ago about that wherever America was, our enemies felt the might of America. Mm-hmm. And when you had that reaction on CNN and other places that did interviews with you when President Biden decided to withdraw, can you walk us through a little bit of what it was like for you, having invested so much of your life and your job and your professional efforts into making sure America's interests were protected, and seeing how we left that situation? Can you walk us through, like, one, how you felt about it, and two, like, just as a person, as a patriot, and two, how would you have done it differently? Yeah,
great question. So, for the record, I wasn't on CNN. Just to
it was
clarify.
Fox News. I remember seeing your face on network.
It was Fox News, right? Yeah. And look, I mean, frankly, I'm still choking on that pill. I mean, and I've got a pretty unique perspective on it, given that I backpacked through there before the military. I speak the language. I deployed there with my brothers in the SEAL teams. And then I sat in the very seats in the Situation Room where these terrible decisions are being made by this administration. And, a couple things stick out to me as far as what went down in Afghanistan. Number one is the timing. I mean, you would think that we were in our first year in war there. The fact that they didn't factor in that there's a fighting season in Afghanistan that begins in the spring, goes through the summer into the fall, and then the late fall, the Taliban pack up their bags, go to the Hindu Kush, sometimes go all the way to Pakistan. And the fact that we announce it at the beginning of fighting season, when pull the plug right in the middle of the summer at the heart of fighting season, and then act surprised that the Taliban took over the country in a matter of days, it shows me fundamentally that the folks up there making these decisions in this White House, they view the world the way they want it to be rather than the way it actually is. And that's a very dangerous thing when it comes to making national security decisions. So that's one, the timing. Number two is the equipment. Guys, I would have been relieved of command as a SEAL officer if one of my men had lost one piece of critical equipment. And the fact that there was no accountability whatsoever in our Pentagon after leaving tens of billions of dollars of equipment to our adversary. And by the way, who paid for that?
Yeah.
You and I did, and every American taxpayer. And that's good stewardship of taxpayer dollars, and they want to hike taxes on us. I mean, give me a break. And then finally, the worst part is that we don't leave Americans behind as a nation. We just do not do that. And I'll tell you, we will move mountains in the SEAL teams to rescue one American hostage. And the fact that we left that many Americans over there while holding to the Taliban, had to send troops back to try to get them out, lost 13 of our good servicemen and women in the process. I mean, these folks are clueless up there. So I would argue that it's probably our greatest foreign policy blunder as a nation. And so I'm still choking on that pill.
Yeah. So Latham, obviously, because of your experiences and the things that you've done in your life, foreign policy and military policy are obviously things that you're talking about on the campaign trail. What other issues, maybe give us like 3 domestic policy issues that you are running on you think are critically important?
Yeah, well, let me just share briefly. I mean, the 3 tenets of my campaign are simple. Yeah. Security, liberty, and prosperity. Security, I'm going to defend our country. Liberty, I'm going to defend our Constitution. And prosperity, I'm going to defend the American economy and the American worker. Obviously, to your point, I'm a national security guy. And let me just hit on that real quick, that we are nowhere near where we need to be as it relates to the China threat. And where I was perched at the White House, I got to see the blood and guts of the CIA and the Pentagon, and there are people doing great work for our country up there right now. But those institutions are in dire need of modern day reform as it relates to the China threat. Somebody has got to do what Sam Nunn did in the 80s and 90s that reformed our national security apparatus to make sure that we'd prevail in the Cold War. Someone's got to do that yesterday as it relates to China. And the fascinating thing that I learned where I was at the White House is that the President of the United States can't even make those institutional changes because they get out. Those bureaucracies can just outlast an administration. The one place you can do it is on Capitol Hill in the Senate on the Armed Services Committee, Select Committee on Intelligence, and Appropriations Committee, because they control the funding and the authorities. So I can tell you guys, when I get up there, I mean, my wife's worried I'm never going to sleep again because I'm going to wake up at 4 a.m. just ready to roar to put our adversaries back on their heels where they belong. Domestically, on the security front, we've got to secure our border. I mean, guys, there is no more excuse for this anymore, especially now that, as y'all just noted, we have a terrorist threat in Afghanistan. We have fentanyl coming over the border that's killing our youth more than anything else, including COVID. So we got to secure our border, and the wall is indeed part of the answer. I've received those briefings in the Situation Room as well, where the Border Patrol agents share that the wall helps funnel people into certain areas of the border. But there's also tunneling that goes underneath the wall, and we've got technologies in this country that can secure our entire southern border, and there's no excuse. There's no excuse anymore not to do it. So number one, we have to secure our border. I think our immigration system is just completely broken. So I think, look, it's already broken. I think we need to have a complete overhaul. I mean, I am fundamentally opposed to, and always will be, illegal immigration. I mean, but we should have a smart immigration system that meets our needs as a nation. I meet with farmers all the time that talk to me about this, and we've got to deliver on that. So secure the border, overhaul, if not just completely rebuild our immigration system. On education, I want to explore when I get up there, guys, the value of the Department of Education. Yeah. And this might sound bold or radical. I don't know. As y'all know, exactly. I mean, our very own Jimmy Carter established it in 1979. Yeah. Can one person, I ask this all the time, can one person please show me the data that proves that since the establishment of the Department of Education, our children's education has improved? Yeah. Because I don't see where it has. The Chinese kids are crushing ours in math and science. We've slipped in the global rankings. I mean, it's just another example of how the federal government gets in the way of real progress for our nation. And I want to explore if it should exist anymore. Yeah. Those are a few off the top of my head. That's awesome.
Sure. So Latham, when we shifting gears to talk about the campaign for just a minute, How does you sound like a completely sane, capable, competent human being? How do you break through the zeitgeist of celebrity that is just dominating Republican politics right now? How does a guy who has the resume that you have, who built yourself up and had a position in the White House, is familiar with all these issues at a granular level, how do you compete against a Heisman Trophy winner who's hiding from you right now, doesn't want to debate you? How do you break through?
Yeah, I mean, great question, and it's my favorite question on the trail. And look, guys, I love Herschel just as much as any other Bulldog. I mean, he was my childhood football hero. But I share with folks every day on the trail, these are incredibly serious times for our country. Celebrities are not going to bail us out of this mess. We've got to do the work ourselves, and it's going to require serious leaders to do it, and leaders who show up. And to your point, with Herschel Walker, I mean, he won't even share the stage with us, won't debate. They've got empty chairs for him at all of our debates. That is not going to get the job done against Raphael Warnock in November. As you all know, Warnock's a smooth operator. He did a charm offensive, ran some great ads, and he took that U.S. Senate seat. We got to have somebody in November to get up on that debate stage and hold him accountable for the bag of goods that he sold Georgians. And guys, I'll tell you, everywhere I am on the trail, I mean, I've cut through this state so many times, and I come across Herschel supporters every day, and his support is paper thin. I eat right through it everywhere I go. I'm just about batting 1,000 with Herschel supporters. So to your question on how do you break through, I mean, guys, he's already gone from 81%. Latest I saw was 57. Mm-hmm. We haven't even gotten started yet. Today, we just launched our first ad. We've raised well north of $3.5 million so far. I'm in the top tier of Senate candidates nationally in my fundraising. I've doubled Gary. I've quadrupled Calvin. I mean, I've out fundraised the rest of the candidates combined besides Herschel. Mm-hmm. And we're just about to start introducing me to this entire state to give them a choice to exactly what you said. I mean, what do we want to be as a nation? Do we want to be a celebrity nation, or do we want to be a serious nation that competes and wins? And I beat him every day on the trail. We just have to scale it. The closest thing that we've had to real data on the ground, the closest thing that we've had to a debate with Herschel, I don't know if you guys saw, it was about a little over a month ago, the Republican Jewish Coalition held their candidate job vetting that they do every cycle for U.S. Senate, where they bring all the candidates in, same day. They rotate you through sequentially in 40-minute increments to go in front of an auditorium of 150 of their members. And then they give us all the same questions and the same amount of time to make our case, and then they vote. Yeah. And guys, I took 50% of the entire vote share. Herschel came in at an abysmal 13%. It shows you that they can load him up with talking points and he can go regurgitate it. But when it gets to any layer of questioning and depth on any issue, he just falls apart. So luckily, serious people are finally starting to pay attention to that. And I can tell you we're going to beat Herschel Walker because we're going to knock him below 50 and pull him into a runoff. And like I said, I'm far more resourced than all these other guys in the race besides him. We're going to slide in at number 2. Once I have him in that runoff, he's mine. As you guys know, the number 1 spot in a runoff is cursed in Georgia. Now, I never want to be in that position. Wow. I mean, really. But in number 2, I mean, you look at every major race, even these Democrats with this mayor's race. Andre was way behind Felicia and leapfrogged her. Yeah. Every major race that happens, and in this case in particular, his celebrity becomes my asset. Yeah. Because whatever gap I have left at that point in name ID is going to vanish overnight. And all eyeballs are going to be on who's this guy that just brought Trump-backed celebrity Herschel Walker into a runoff. And if things were cooking along grandly as a nation right now and everybody was happy, I'd say celebrity would beat me. But I've yet to meet one person on the trail that thinks that these are normal times for the country and are happy with where it's going. There's a thirst for real leadership, next generation leadership. Obviously, I'm biased, but once I get him in that runoff, I'm betting on me.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Saddler. We wish you the best of luck on the trail, and we'll be looking forward to hearing more from you and your campaign. If you want to give a shout out to where people can find you, or if they want to get connect with you at all, go ahead, and then we'll let you go.
Thank you so much. So please come to our website to join the mission. It's lathamsaddler.com. I know it's a weird name, LathamSaddler.com. And please vote in May. You can vote anytime from May 2nd to May 24th. And I can't wait to knock Raphael Warnock out of that seat. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you for being with us. We appreciate you. Thank you for your service.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. So we are going to go ahead and move on to the rest of our agenda. We are packed with stuff, Buzz. Excited about the Latham Saddler campaign. You know, I've said this all along. Herschel has an opportunity to earn my vote. And he does, and he still does.
Sure.
But if he does not want to debate, I'm not voting for any candidate who will run away from a debate, whether it's in a Republican primary or general election. I'm just not voting for you.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think before we got on, I was chatting with Latham. We were sitting here, Scott, as you were logging on, and that was one of the things I thought. What really worries me, the whole purpose of a primary and the primary system is for members, more informed members of each party, to pick who they want to represent them. And part of that process is having debates, and it's a training ground, right? It's if Herschel's going to be our nominee, then this is training camp for him, and he's skipping training camp, right? So he's got to step up and do this, and there's still time, plenty of time to.
And I'm not going to lie.
Yeah,
I know Gary Black, and this was my first real conversation in depth at any level with Mr. Saddler. Mm-hmm. I can see why Herschel would be scared. These guys are competent individuals. They know the issues. They don't need somebody to coach them. They've been living it. And so I can see why he would run. I can see why he would leverage his celebrity to avoid any type of mishap that would happen with them. But
Scott, I'm not going to say I'm not ready to take the pledge that you just did that I won't vote for somebody who doesn't debate. But it really, really concerns me because, as we know, I mean, you've seen it. Raphael Warnock is a incredibly skilled orator, and he proved in his last campaign that he's a very skilled debater. He's a sharp candidate, and you got to put your A team on the field if you're going to beat him. So,
switching gears and talking about people who used to be really sharp and used to be part of the A team. Mm-hmm. We now have this week received conflicting reports from the Virginian Newt Gingrich that he has endorsed Vernon Jones for the 10th Congressional District, cut a video where he says that Vernon Jones is the best thing since sliced bread. Fine young man that will fight for conservative values, and he fully endorsed him in the 10th Congressional District. It was on video. Yeah. And the Vernon Jones campaign released that video saying, we got endorsed. They sent out email blasts saying we've been endorsed. Yep. And CJ Pearson, who is the spokesperson for the Vernon Jones campaign, was making a big deal. He even actually attacked me when I said that Newt Gingrich is no longer a serious person for endorsing a Democrat from DeKalb County for a Republican congressional seat. All of this happened, and then like almost moments later, Newt Gingrich tweets out, "No, really, I meant to say I support Mike Collins." Mm-hmm. Buzz, what is happening?
So, all right, so it continues on because later, Gingrich's spokesperson said, "Look, this was sent out prematurely." And the way I read it, and maybe I'm misinterpreting this, I'd love your thoughts, Scott, but the way I read the statement from Gingrich's spokesperson was, we cut the video. We weren't sending it out because we needed to confirm that there were no prior commitments that the Speaker Gingrich would be violating here. And Mike Collins raises his hand and said, "Yeah, that other commitment was me." So, yeah, and Collins,
because he had actually endorsed, right?
Yeah,
Newt had already endorsed.
Yeah,
Mike Collins.
And Collins, it was kind of funny. All this is happening, and I get an email from the Collins campaign, and there's a picture of Mike Collins. He's looks like he's out putting out signs and whatnot, and there he is on the phone, purportedly with Newt Gingrich. And the statement from his email was essentially, hey, Newt called, we're all good, we all laughed about it, and he's still firmly behind me. But even since then, Jones is persisting on and saying, no, he's endorsed me now. And there's some talk show host in Northeast Georgia who does little YouTube videos I saw the Alabama cheerleader was tweeting out his statement, that he thinks there's something really sinister going on here. Nothing sinister. My reading of Gingrich's statements was, it seems to me they didn't realize that Mike Collins and Vernon were running in the same race.
Exactly. This is my take on that, right? That's the point exactly.
Mm-hmm.
That the Virginian Newt Gingrich didn't even realize.
Virginia is a very fine place. It's an awesome state. I love Virginia. It's one of my top 50 states. But
he's lived there longer than half of my lifetime. And I'm not knocking Virginia just because Newt Gingrich lives there and has lived there for decades. If he lived in Texas, I would call him the Texan Newt Gingrich.
The Texan Herschel Walker, huh?
The Texan Herschel Walker might apply depending on the time of day. But I would, if he lived in Tennessee, if he lived in Florida, I would call him the Floridian, right? He just so happens he lives in Virginia and has for decades, which is sort of the point of me pointing it out every single time, because the Virginian Newt Gingrich has not lived here. He doesn't know that Mike Collins and Vernon Jones are running in the same thing. And if he doesn't know that they're running for the same office, what else does he not know? He's out of touch with Republican politics in Georgia. He's trying to leverage his legacy for whatever advantage. I don't know. We do know that Donald Trump has endorsed Vernon Jones. That was a backroom deal to get him out of the governor's race in an attempt to bolster the flailing Perdue campaign for governor. But, and I know I'm making Buzz all kinds of nervous here because I'm using all these terms in absolutes. But the reality is that he didn't know, right? Mm-hmm. He didn't know, Buzz. He didn't realize, because he's so out of touch, that that the Trump endorsed candidate is running against a family friend because he served with Mike Collins' daddy, right? Yeah. And that's a problem.
Yeah, you might be right, but look, I think the reason that Newt endorses and the reason that people in Georgia still continue to seek his endorsement is because he does still, in Republican circles in this state, still have a lot of influence. He still has a lot of friends, and it's just it failed him in this moment because I don't know how Vernon got to Newt. I don't know what pathways he took to get there. But he dropped the ball there. His staff or whatever.
Newt Gingrich is a conservative icon in the state of Georgia.
Absolutely,
and he has a positive legacy.
Yeah,
that he is tarnishing every time he does stuff like this.
Well,
getting engaged on behalf of David Perdue, getting engaged on behalf of Vernon Jones, then having to walk that back immediately. It tarnishes his influence. It weakens his influence. And that's a shame because his legacy should be a very positive one.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So speaking of legacies, there's a gentleman who retired from the legislature or is retiring to become the next ambassador to, was it Haiti? Or Dominican Republic? Maybe it's Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic, I believe.
Yeah. So Calvin Smyre began his first year in the legislature before yours truly was born. I'm 46 years old. He just wrapped his 48th legislative session, and he's on his way. What's that?
I was alive.
Yeah, you were alive, and I was not. I had not yet been born. My parents were teenagers when Calvin Smyre was first sworn in to office. His tenure has been marked by him being in the majority for the vast time that he was there. Most of the time that he was there, he was in the majority. And then as a member of the minority of the last couple of decades, he became the dean of the House. And whenever you wanted to try to do something in a bipartisan way, you went to Calvin. And do you have a Calvin Smyre story?
Yeah, I think, I'll tell you this. there was another retired member of the legislature who retired this year, Tommy Benton, had made some very controversial statements about the Ku Klux Klan. This was several years ago when I was in the legislature, and I really felt like I had to say something about this publicly. And House rules prevent us from calling out other members publicly, right? So I ran what I wanted
by name, but you can attack the idea.
Yeah, exactly. So I ran what I wanted to say by the speaker. He says, "All right," and gave me the opportunity to give a morning order, which I did. And I talked about how I had learned a lot of things by reading a book called "Slavery by Another Name," and it tells the story. I won't belabor this too long, but it tells the story of how after 1877, federal troops left the South. All the states in the South rewrote their constitutions, including Georgia, to more or less set up a system where we had slavery by another name. And, from that all became, what later would be called the Jim Crow laws that denied African Americans all sorts of rights. And I said that, I basically said that I love Georgia. I love this state. But we can't look back on that history as if it were a good thing. And our former colleague, Tommy Benton, he's definitely seems to be a person who still believes in the lost cause theory of the Civil War.
He definitely is.
But after that, so I gave that speech. And after that, the first person to greet me when I got back to my seat was Calvin Smyre. And he gave me a big hug and he said, "Buzz, I really appreciate that." And it meant a lot coming from a Republican and coming from a white Republican to say those things. And that meant a lot to me because, it meant to me that he got the message I was trying to send, that not everybody thought like Tommy Benton, and that Tommy Benton's ideas on that issue were out of step with reality and out of step with our modern times. And that meant a lot to me. And, because he was a very well-respected, as you said, Scott, he was a very well-respected person in his later years. Now, obviously, we could talk for hours as he did when he gave his farewell, but he did a lot of things and wore a lot of hats. And he, at one point in time, he was the rules chairman. And we've talked before when we were talking about Senator Mullis retiring. The rules chairman is the guy who gets to, has the job of telling you that this bill that you've worked on for a long time is dead. And, you don't make friends doing that. A lot of people don't take that well. And so Calvin, when he had that role, he played that role. And but
with a gong, right?
Yeah, that's right.
He had I never saw it, but I've heard stories that he would gong representatives as they were presenting their bill and rules.
Yeah,
Get out of
that
here.
was sort of the signal that you're done, buddy.
Your time is ended.
Right, but he, that was a role that he had to play. He had been asked by the Speaker, Tom Murphy, to do that, and he did it. And then, but he still was able to maintain allegiances across the aisle. And when Speaker Ralston needed a bipartisan task, he called Calvin Smyre.
He did,
and it got done.
The younger generation of Democrats didn't seem to appreciate him during my time there. They were grumbling towards him. They didn't see him as being on the same page as them because he was willing to work with Republicans on certain issues. But this is a man who'd been through the ringer on both sides. He rose to prominence within his own caucus in the Democrat caucus when they were in the majority, was rules chairman, very powerful position, played negotiator between Tom Murphy and Zell Miller back and forth oftentimes. They go between the two of them, negotiating big pieces of legislation and policy. But, the thing that kind of stands out for me, the one story I will share about Calvin Smyre is his love of the House. I think it illustrates his love of the House and the decorum that goes with being a member of the House. A member of his own caucus, Renita Shannon, went to the well. She was the last speaker to speak against the heartbeat bill a couple of years ago. And she didn't look up. She didn't look around. she read. She kept reading and she kept reading until the time had expired. When the time had expired for the debate to end, she kept going.
Yeah.
Yet she persisted, right? So I think what she was looking for, because Radina Shannon views herself as a historical figure.
Yeah.
And I think what she was hoping would happen is that she would be dragged out by some Georgia highway patrolman.
Yeah.
And it would be a camera photo op for her that she would use later. And maybe I'm cynical, but I was in the room that night and I saw it playing out because the speaker kept telling her that her time in the well had ended. He turned off her microphone.
Yeah.
And when she did, she kept going. She kept reading. Yeah. And the speaker kept saying from the rostrum, the gentlelady's time has expired. And he was
in a very calm tone. He wasn't yelling at her, right? As I recall.
He was not yelling at her, but it was clear that things were getting ready to escalate. And Calvin Smyre stood up.
Mm-hmm.
And he went down to the well and he put his arm around her and he said, let's go.
Yeah.
And he got her to walk away without there being any type of escalation that would have embarrassed the House. His love of the House of Representatives was bigger than the political opportunities that presented itself in that moment.
Yeah.
And I just remembered that, and my respect for him was cemented at that moment. He really genuinely cared about the House more than his party, more about defeating that piece of policy that he disagreed with. He voted no, but he wanted the House to maintain its sense of decorum. And that's what I will remember him for always.
No, and
right. And since I was very kind to him just a moment ago, I will say an hour and 15 minutes on Sine Die for a goodbye speech is way too long, bro. It's just way too long. It's just too long.
48 years, there's a lot of stories to tell, right?
I mean, his farewell speech was almost as long as his tenure in the House. It felt like that. I mean, good night. And right before lunch, too. So, everybody's like, what do we got to do to go get some food?
Yep.
I'm kidding, Calvin. We wish you the best of luck. And hopefully you took that in good humor. I hope so.
Yep.
Where do I want to go next? I'm going to just go ahead and down the list on our agenda here, even though there's no real smooth transition. And that is, have you heard about the financial status of Stacey Abrams, Buzz?
She's doing well.
She's doing well for herself. This is a lady who, when she ran for governor last time, had tax debts that were used against her. She owed hundreds of thousands of dollars in back taxes. She was on a payment plan because she couldn't afford her tax bills, let alone all of her other bills. She was not doing well. Fast forward 4 years, her latest financial disclosure shows that she is in fact now a millionaire.
Yes, 3 times
How's
over.
that for the American dream, Buzz? What do you make of it?
The American dream is a beautiful thing. There are many paths to wealth and prosperity, and she found one in losing elections and becoming a Democratic superstar. So good for her.
Well, claiming that you actually won an election you lost can be very profitable.
Yes. I should have tried that after my Secretary of State's race. I should have started touring the world and making that claim that Brad Raffensperger stole the election right out from under my nose.
Apparently that's all you got to do to make $1 million to have $1 million net worth. Well, we're not wealth envious over here. We're not tax the rich, soak the rich people over here. We're going to say good for you, Stacey.
Absolutely.
Abrams. You pulled yourself up by your bootstraps because America is a wonderful place to live where you can go from owing the federal government hundreds of thousands of dollars to having a positive net worth over $1 million. That's America. You're living the American dream. And that's why Republicans are fighting for you to help you live that American dream in spite of what you're trying to do to everybody else. So congratulations and keep it up. We'll keep fighting and making Georgia the #1 place for you to live and work and play. Just stay out of our way so that you can continue to make your millions. Okay? Is that a good deal?
That's yes. I'm sure she'll take that deal. Sort of.
I hope she does. Or she's just going to, well, I mean, if she loses, she's going to say she won again, right? I mean,
right, sure.
That's the way this plays out. In Georgia, every election is stolen and the truth is buried underneath the money-making grift. Oh, speaking of somebody else who likes to talk about stolen elections.
Yes.
Trump has made news in various outlets. He continues to do interviews. We talked a little bit about this last week, but he has come out and made more comments.
Yes.
Hedging his bets about David Perdue losing to Brian Kemp. What do you think his end game is?
Well, it's all about him, right? It's because you listen to these comments, the ones this week and the ones previously that we discussed. It all gets back to how incredibly unfair people will be to him if David Perdue loses. Not concern for David Perdue that his political legacy will take a huge blow here. It's all about what will this do to Donald Trump, and yeah. So it's a very, very. I guess we shouldn't be surprised because we've seen this in other races. We talked a couple weeks ago about the unendorsement of Mo Brooks, where Trump was trying to make it seem like Brooks had suddenly gone woke, and that was probably the first time in Mo Brooks' life he'd ever been called woke. So, yeah, I mean,
or anything like it.
He's more concerned about protecting his legacy than he is really about anything else.
Well, is it protecting his legacy, or I guess he's shifted into protecting a legacy from just
legacy,
pure revenge.
Legacy is probably not the right word, right? He's trying to maintain his power and influence within the Republican Party, and he knows that that's wrapped up in winning, in continuing this aura of being a winner. And Brian Kemp's going to deal at a big blow because I don't know if we have it on our agenda, Scott, but with this late breaking poll that came out this afternoon, we can talk about that. It's more bad news for David Perdue.
So you did mention, since you mentioned the poll, and it's sort of the same topic, we'll go ahead and bring it up. There was a poll that was released today. It was commissioned by WRBL.com, a CBS news station here in Georgia. Chuck Williams wrote the article where we are looking at an 11-point lead for Brian Kemp over David Perdue, where Kemp comes in at 43% to 32%, and they're 17% undecided. Yeah. Now, that's the margin remains the same. It's about 11, 12 points. Every single poll that comes out has Kemp beating Perdue, but this one also has Kemp beating Abrams in a general election.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I do have to question the poll somewhat, though, Buzz. And it's because it has Candace Taylor not in third place, but in fourth place.
Yes. And
we all know Jesus Guns Baby is catching fire in Georgia, right? For those of you who don't know, I'm on Team Kemp, so I just like to make fun of the Jesus Guns Babies lady. But it has her in fourth place, and Catherine Davis, who nobody knows, at 5.4%, almost 5.5% in this poll, going for this. To my knowledge, this is the very first time that we've ever used the words Catherine Davis on the Peach Pundit podcast, coming in third at 5.4% in this poll. So away, I begin to wonder if this poll is valid.
Well, look. Here's my theory on that. You do see these things in polls. It's somebody that doesn't have a lot of name ID, and here's my theory. I think it's another expression of being undecided. It's somebody who says, "I'm not sold on Kemp. I'm not, but this Perdue guy's not firing me up." And Candace Taylor, because she was endorsed by Linwood, that's not the person for me. And so, what do? You default to the other person. And we don't know the order. I mean, Emerson is a well-respected pollster. They've been doing this for a long time, but I think it's statistical noise, Scott. To me, those are just more undecided people who didn't want to pick the other three names and went with her.
Well, if they did it alphabetically, she would have been at the top because of the letter D. Yeah. So it's possible.
Right. Good pollsters will rotate it. But a certain percentage of the time, she'd be at the top, and somebody selects,
whoever the first person was.
Yeah.
But a guy named Tom Williams bringing up the rear at 1.1%.
Yeah.
That is also the first time we've ever mentioned Tom Williams' name
Yes.
on this podcast. 1.1% of the people polled here said they were going to vote for Tom Williams. 16.9 or 17%, just round up, said they were undecided. Do you think it's April the 6th as we sit here recording? We're a little more than a month away, 6 or 7 weeks from the May 24th primary. Do you think Republicans are still undecided at a clip of 17%?
I mean, it's possible. And I think, because you look at some of the other numbers in the poll, some of the other questions, there was one I was thinking of that was, not great news for Kemp. Where was it? Yeah, job approval for Kemp. Approval 41.5, disapproval 41.6. Now, obviously, all the Democrats are going to answer that question, but then a chunk of Republicans too. So I think, it's not all great news in this poll for Brian Kemp. So and that large a number of undecideds would not be good for the incumbent as well. So I think, it's it kind of shows Perdue about where he's been in other polls, and in the low 30s. This one has Kemp at a little bit lower than other polls have had him in, because there's been a couple where he's been over 50 or hovering close to 50. So it's I don't know. We'll see. And is this closing now? Is this race closing at all? It doesn't seem like it, because there's still a pretty sizable gap between them. And and Kemp and Perdue has spent a lot of money already, and Trump came and held that rally, which you would think would
no bump at all
fire up his base, but it hasn't really.
No bump at all from that. At all. Not even a little bit, because Perdue was in the mid 30s and now he's in the low 30s.
Right.
If you use this as a tracking mechanism. But here's the stat I think that causes Trump to kind of hedge his bets with Perdue. And that is 38%. 38% of those people who in this poll said that if Donald Trump endorses David Perdue, it would make them more likely to vote for David Perdue. 38%. Right. And yet Perdue comes in at 32%. So there's 6% left over.
And in that poll, almost 31% say it makes them less likely to vote for Perdue. So
but he's not converting the people who said it makes it more likely, right?
Right. Because
they're 6% fewer are saying they'll vote for David Perdue when presented with the choices, even though it makes them more likely that since Donald Trump has endorsed him, that they vote for Perdue.
Right.
But he's not converting them.
Right.
That's a problem, right?
That is a problem. And I think, we've talked about it before, that there are a chunk of the MAGA world that don't like David Perdue because they don't like very many people at all, but they perceive that in their opinion, Perdue didn't fight as hard as he should have for Donald Trump. And so there's some who were not fired up about him too. So it's definitely not, it's not, obviously you're Brian Kemp. You'd love to be closer to that 50% number in this poll. But it's not very good news for David Perdue in this poll either, because he is not sealing the deal. And I guess one other thing that's interesting in this poll, Scott, is that it shows, let me see if I'm scrolling through the slide deck. Well, first of all, the race for Secretary of State on the Democratic side is wide open. D. Dawkins Hagler, a former colleague of ours, is essentially in first place with John Eves, another Atlanta politician. B. Wynn, who seems to be the candidate of choice for the Democratic establishment, was at 7% in this poll. But on the Republican side, 36, they're almost 37% undecided. But Brad Raffensperger is sitting there at 28.6 and Jody Heiss at 26.1. So, what happens if Raffensperger, who everybody has pronounced dead in the water, makes a runoff? That would be rather interesting.
I have a hard time. I don't know. I'm having a hard time with this poll. I don't think B wins in single digits. There's just no way. There's just no way. So I'm going to call this poll an outlier. That's my official take, and I'm going to stand by it. I know it's favorable for the Kemp campaign because he's still maintaining an 11-point lead over Perdue, but there's just so much wrong with it. I just can't. I'm not going to put any weight.
It's interesting because it's funny. Earlier today, I was looking because I was like, well, I wonder when we're going to get another poll on the governor's race here in Georgia. And look, it's been almost a month since a poll had been taken. The Fox News poll was the last one. That one had Kemp at 50%, I believe. So
right, yeah.
This will get. Yeah, I mean that's why we always, I always at least, and I'm sure you do too, Scott, follow the real clear politics average. That's what you want to see because it takes into account, it lessens the various quirkiness of various polls and outliers and whatnot, and gives you an idea of the trends.
So the last thing that I think Trump has sowed the seeds of is the only way that David Perdue loses is if the election is stolen. And and he said that, but I think he might be backing off of that. And the legislature this week on Sine Die did pass a single bill relating to election security. And that was moving the GBI to have original jurisdiction. So the way it works today, without this bill becoming law, is that if there are suspected improprieties in an election, that the local law enforcement is engaged first. The problem with that, obviously, is that they are elected as well. You know, the sheriff is elected in our counties, and so they would potentially be in a position to be investigating their own election. So this would give, this bill that they passed sort of last minute, would give original jurisdiction to the GBI, which has resources throughout the state to investigate election fraud or improprieties in the process. The Democrats said that this was an attempt at voter intimidation. They went to the well and spoke against it using those terms over and over again. But in doing so, they ignored this fact that it just changes which law enforcement agency is responsible for investigating it. It doesn't remove or add law enforcement to the process. In order for the GBI to take action and actually arrest somebody, they have to have probable cause.
Right.
So they're not going to arrest anybody without a probable cause.
Right.
And they point to a case down in South Georgia, and I forget there's something 11, the town that they're from. Do you know what I'm talking about? There were school board improprieties in an election where people were accused of ballot harvesting, and they went to trial, and they had a mistrial, and they went to trial again. They had a mistrial, and finally they let them go because they were tired of prosecuting it. But there was probable cause that there were improprieties and ballot stuffing going on. They didn't prove it in the court of law. That's our justice system. But they're trying to say that it was voter intimidation. Well, if there's probable cause, it needs to be investigated.
Right.
I mean, do you have a problem with the GBI investigating elections?
No, not really. I think, I mean, they've been given original jurisdiction over several things. And this just adds that to that list. So I think it'll be rare that when this happens, and it will be a case. I mean, I think I think it can really be beneficial is, sort of what you referenced earlier, Scott. If you have corrupt local officials, then under current law, there's not really a mechanism to do anything about it. From a criminal standpoint, and this would fix that situation if there are corrupt local officials who are turning a blind eye to obvious corruption and vote stealing and whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, I think, look, it's an election year. Elections bills are a hot topic and a lightning rod, and Democrats are playing this to their maximum advantage, and Republicans are too, right? I mean, that's the whole reason this bill was brought, was to try to get the Republican base calmed down about these things. And so I doubt we will see Vic Reynolds, the current GBI chief, is a rock solid lawman. He's not going to abuse this, and nor let his agents and officers abuse this. So I don't think we'll see much trouble come from this. I think it'll work out just fine.
And they have the resources to go and do it. The state election board investigators is a small team. They have to drive out to wherever it happens. The GBI has agents everywhere, and they can be more effective and efficient. I will say this about election bills and the Democrats screaming and yelling. Jason has said this on this podcast. Why now? Why now? Why now?
Yeah.
And I saw B Win in the well and Sine Die talking about you're trying to placate a base that will never be placated. Well, here's the thing. There are things that can be done to make sure everybody has confidence in our election process. And right now, I did not cause this. Buzz did not cause this. The members of the legislature who are trying to pass these bills to give everybody a sense of confidence in their elections did not cause this. We know who did. We know that Stacey Abrams said her election was stolen. We know that Donald Trump said his election was stolen. We know who did cause this. Yeah. And that right now there's a situation where there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Georgians who do not have confidence for one reason or another in our election process. They don't have that confidence. The Democrats are advantaged by that in the current system. If we do nothing to try to reestablish faith for the people, whether they have wrongly or rightly believed something that's true or false, right? Regardless of how they got to where they are, they do believe that elections can be stolen in Georgia, that there can be fraud. And the Democrats have an advantage if those people continue to want to sit on the sidelines and not participate in the electoral process.
Yeah. And Scott,
want.
Yeah. I mean, when I ran for Secretary of State, this issue was a regular part of practically every speech I ever gave. And that was at the time when I was campaigning, there was polling data that showed that 59% of Democrats were convinced that Russians hacked into the voting machines and changed votes to benefit Donald Trump. And 55% of Republicans were convinced that there were millions, tens of millions of people, of illegal immigrants voting in elections and illegal votes cast in every election. And, the evidence didn't support either one of those claims. But my point when I was campaigning was that both sides were getting very dangerously close. And it's only gotten worse because of the two people you mentioned, Scott. It's only gotten worse. And where large chunks of the base of the losing side is convinced that the winner got there by fraudulent means. And that is a very dangerous thing in a free society when people lose that trust. So we have to restore trust in the electoral process on both sides. We have to.
But here's the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, right? The Democrats took that message. The Russians stole the election. The Russians got Donald Trump elected, and they got their base fired up. Our base says, screw it. Yes. I'm not going to go vote.
Yeah,
and the
absolutely.
Democrats see that as their advantage here. And so they don't want any new election law that would reestablish confidence among Republicans to pass. So in essence, what they are doing is advocating for voter disenfranchisement. Look, I know that they got to what they believe in a weird way, and it may not be an honest or true way even, but that's how they feel. Yeah. They feel that way, and we have an obligation to make sure that everybody feels confident in the election process. Yeah. And the Democrats fighting these bills and saying that we don't need them, what they are really doing is they're just advocating for their own advantage. That's the only thing they're doing.
Of course. But look, and suppression is even a better argument, because what's the answer to suppression? Stay in line. No matter, even if it does take you 10 hours to vote, stay in line. Don't let those Republicans suppress your vote. So yeah, it is a very motivating. And you're right, Scott. And and this was where Trump blew it by claiming that the machines themselves were rigged, and that the system of absentee balloting was rigged, why would you go vote? And there's no way to overcome a rigged system where foreign entities such as Hugo Chavez or China or wherever can simply manipulate the vote. So yeah, Democrats picked a much better electoral lie to use to motivate their base than we did.
Yeah, I mean, standing in line can be overcome, right?
Yes.
But it's ironic that Republicans fought for additional machines to be placed in places so that Democrats could vote easier, and Democrats fought that. But okay.
And SB 202, right? SB 202
yes.
instructs the Secretary of State to decrease the time that people have to stand in line.
Right. If there's too many people standing in line, add more machines to cut down on wait times. That was an SB 202, a Republican passed bill that made it easier for Democrats to vote. It just made it harder to cheat. So other bills that passed on Sine Die sort of last minute. We had a Will Wade, if you recall, when he was on, talked about his divisive concepts bill that passed, and it got the Protect Women's Sports bill sort of in a watered down fashion, but it definitely was attached, and those are on their way to the governor's desk for signage. What do you make of those two concepts being in the same bill, and what does it mean for Georgia's moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I have a lot of respect for Will Wade. Big fan of Will Wade. I don't know how I think banning divisive concepts is hard. It's hard to do because you can just easily change the language and teach the same concept, maybe not in a divisive a way. But it's politically popular, and it is important. I mean, I think it's very important for us to have a debate over what is taught in classrooms. Parents need to be involved in that discussion. They need to be involved at the local school board level, where those are the people who actually pick the books and the curriculum that's put in the classrooms. That's not done at the state level. That's done at the local level. So folks absolutely should pay attention to what their school board does and on all these matters. And we've talked a little bit on this podcast about the whole issue of transgendered folks participating, especially men who have transitioned to women competing. And it is, I heard it described very well on the Commentary Magazine podcast. I mean, Americans are compassionate, and they have a strong belief in fairness. And this issue of transgender sports touches both of those, because most people, when a person says, I'm transgendered, I feel like I'm in the wrong body, most people have compassion on that situation. But when it comes to competing in sports, where clearly a person is advantaged, such as Leah Thomas, the swimmer, being the perfect example, clearly physically Leah Thomas is advantaged over the other female swimmers. Well, that hits at fairness, and so that's what this bill does. I think maybe it's written well, maybe it's not. We'll see how it plays out. But it's addressing that whole issue of fairness. And I see Democrats online on Twitter especially are just apoplectic over the passage of that bill, that it's cruel and so on and so forth. But what we have now is just not a good solution. I don't think, getting back to the fairness aspect of it, I don't think people want to necessarily deny a transgendered person the right to compete in an activity or participate in an activity that person loves. But we've got to find a better way, because what's happening now, and it is rare, and yes, it has not happened in Georgia, but it has happened across this country, and it's just not fair the way it's being done right now. So this bill may not be the perfect answer to it, but I think it's an attempt to strike that, on the side of fairness. So, Scott, I love your thoughts on that too. It's not an easy issue, but I'd love your thoughts on it.
My thing is, I like to watch how the media reacts to bills like this, because this is where you can pick up on media bias, like in a heartbeat. A couple of former reporters are on Twitter talking about how it's an LGBTQ bill, and it's not. It's meant to protect women who are competing in athletics in Georgia from having to be disadvantaged. So that's the effort, right? But that gets lost in the whole LGBTQ debate. And what we're faced with is this such a scenario where the media is saying the Republicans hate gays, or the Republicans are anti-LGBTQ.
Right.
And Bluestein tweeted that the bill would prohibit trans students from participating in sports. Those were his words. And that's simply untrue. If a trans athlete wants to participate in sports, they still can. If they're a trans woman, they cannot participate against women. They could still participate against the guys. And this is not unprecedented. Whenever women's sports do not have the opportunity to have their own division from men, women have been allowed to compete against men for decades. I remember in my neck of the woods, we didn't have a fast pitch softball team when I was growing up, and a girl wanted to play baseball because fast pitch was more her thing.
Right.
If we had a fast pitch softball team, she would have signed up for that. But our high school at the time had a slow pitch, and that was not thrilling to her. So she wanted to play baseball, and it wasn't necessarily my high school. It was in the area where I lived growing up, and she was allowed to play baseball against boys.
Yeah.
Women who wrestle for years have wrestled in a weight class against boys or men. If there were no other women to compete against, they would go and compete against men. And they're allowed to do that. Trans athletes can still participate in sports in Georgia. If they want to go play football, they can go play football. If they want to swim, they can swim. If they want to go play golf, they can play golf. But we're not going to disadvantage our girls and say you have to face off against somebody who's been through puberty as a male and have to deal with the testosterone that has pumped through their system since they were growing up and through pubescence.
Yeah.
So it gets spun that way, and that's what disappoints me is that the media they spin it that Republicans are evil, Democrats are fighting for everybody, and that's just not the truth.
And I imagine if you took a poll, because we saw this with the bill in Florida, the so-called "Don't Say Gay" bill in Florida, which really was about saying, you know what, third graders and younger, we don't really need to be talking about sexual relations of any kind in that.
Right.
That bill polls off the charts pretty much across all the whole political spectrum.
When it's presented the way it actually does
this
things.
Issue is a similar thing because it gets back to that issue of fairness. Americans very much respect fairness. They want to allow people to do what they want to do. So just as you pointed out, Scott, nobody's saying that trans athletes are banned from all sports. It's just where's the proper venue for them to exercise their love of sport, and how do we maintain competitive, fair competition, and while doing that, that's the root of the issue, and we've got to get past all this noise and get back to get down to the heart of the issue, and that's how we solve problems in a way that's fair and compassionate to everybody.
Speaking of noise, did you hear the noise on Sine Die? All the cheers and the roarous applause when they signed the mental health bill into law. Governor Kemp had a special signing ceremony on Sine Die, which I don't remember a bill getting signed on Sine Die. Maybe it happened, but it's pretty rare. And the hundreds of people gathered there. A lot of them wearing these green T-shirts with big white block letters saying, "Thank you, Speaker Ralston." And they all gathered around the entrance to his office on the third floor, and they sang a song that made me throw up a little bit in my mouth. I'm not going to lie. I had to walk away. Because they began singing off key, but in their own way, beautifully. "Thank you for being a friend." The theme song to the Golden Girls as the speaker came out to be serenaded by this group of people that had gathered to honor him in this way.
Yes.
Were you there, Buzz? I
was, and I was there. I saw the bill signing, and you're right. There was a large crowd, a bipartisan crowd, and of course, it was noted that this bill, the final version of the bill, passed unanimously. Zero opposition votes in either chamber, which, Scott, as you know, is that happens sometimes, but the issue is not a big issue. No offense, but it's not a huge reform, and this was a huge reform that in the end passed with zero opposition, and that should be noted. That should be celebrated. And I happened to be outside the speaker's office when I saw the crowd, and Jeff Breedlove, the director of that group that was there doing the singing, a friend, a guy I've known for a long time, a good guy, was walking toward me as live streaming and looking for people to come sing with him. And I thought I needed to get out of the way because I didn't really want to sing. And I wasn't sure I knew all the words. So
everybody knows the words of that song.
If Jeff saw me running the other way, it wasn't nothing personal. I just wasn't prepared to sing on camera.
Yeah,
but I certainly understand their joy. And Speaker Ralston, as we've said, and we'll say it again here now, he deserves a lot of credit for bringing this issue to the forefront and using this is a good use of power. He used his power to get this, to rally the legislature and get this thing passed into law, and Governor Kemp happily signed it. Yeah.
So the underlying thing was great. The way they decided to cheer for the speaker, saccharine sweet. And Buzz, thank you for being a friend. If
you too,
I've traveled around the world and back again, and if you ever throw a party and invited everyone you knew, you would see the biggest gift would be from me, and the card attached would say, "Thank you for being a friend." That's it. That's what we got, folks.
What a way to end. That's the perfect ending to the show.
Yeah. The Peach Pundit podcast, its contributors and guests are expressing their own opinions. These opinions may not represent the opinions of those who we may be professionally associated with. Keep that in mind. Don't go finding us and canceling us with our employers, people. But do like, subscribe, share with your friends, and check out patreon.com/peachpundit. Give us that $5. We need you. You need us. It will make your life. Listen, you listen to this, the sound quality can be so much better if you just chip in $5. Please chip in $5. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Later, Scott.